What would you ever think of when you think of the best animated series of all time, from any country or network? Some may say Batman the Animated Series, Fullmetal Alchemist, Gravity Falls, or Samurai Jack. However, another included in this list of high-tier cartoons is Avatar The Last Airbender. This has to be one of the most influential shows of all time. Not only is it one of the best animated shows, but it's considered one of the best shows, period. While I personally wouldn't put this over something like Breaking Bad or Batman the Animated Series, I still completely understand and very much agree with this moniker that the series has been given for the last 19 years since it's come out. Has a rich and expansive world, likable characters, and probably some of the best setup and payoff in a series, period. Now, with this being one of Nickelodeon's most influential and popular series, of course they'd have to capitalize on the success somehow. They tried releasing The Legend of Korra in 2012, a spin-off sequel sort of series that takes place after the original show. It definitely wasn't received as well, but it's still considered a fairly solid series that expands on the world of Avatar. By the time Korra ended, the series was dormant for several years. So considering how popular it was among fans, Nickelodeon had done their best to capitalize again. They made a partnership with Netflix and even planned on releasing an animated film next year. But that Netflix partnership is exactly what needs to be mentioned today. The Netflix partnership entailed a live-action Avatar TV series that promised to be better than the M. Night Shyamalan version from 2010. This got people excited, even if it had the infinite potential to fuck things up. It very much did live up to that potential and even surpassed it. Ever since the first trailer for this came out, a lot of people were apprehensive about it. From the original creators leaving to the promise of a Game of Thrones-esque tone, to them saying that the characters wouldn't even do side things, also known as the things that made the original show fun. It just seemed like they wanted to streamline and strip the series down of what made it fun. And it turns out, they very much exactly did that. So we're gonna do something I don't do very often. We're not just looking at the show as a series on its own. We're going to look at how it fails as an adaptation, and the overall failure to adapt this world. After watching Netflix Avatar, I decided to rewatch the entire series, just to provide reasons why the series fails as an adaptation to the cartoon. I'm mostly going to compare the series to stuff it already adapts. Only to be fair, as the show is on track to adapt the latter two books of the original show. Remember that anything I say can be dated in the next 2 seasons if they come out in like 2025 or something. So the show begins and here's our first issue, right there. Now most who either don't remember or haven't watched the original first episode of the Avatar series might be confused as to why I'm seemingly nitpicking the first minute that plays after the Netflix logo. Don't worry, this is a very big issue. And definitely not a nitpick like that one dude complaining about a dude forgetting his keys in Toy Story 4 or something. So the first issue is that they show how the comet fell from the original show, which had way more of a presence than it does here. It's so damn small for some reason. I know that sounds like a nitpick, but I literally didn't even realize the comet was there until I accidentally rewinded the first scene. Anyway, there's Fire Nation Spy, that doesn't matter, but I'll admit that the action is pretty cool here. And then they play Aang's backstory at the very start. To clarify why this is an issue and is poorly executed, we have to look at the opening for the original cartoon. In the original series, the first characters we actually see are Katara and Sokka while they're on a boat. The whole point of discovering Aang in this scene is that it's a mystery, and not just shown within the first few seconds. They show the characters' personalities, how they bounce off of each other, we see how things are in what's considered current day in this universe after the intro exposits what happened between the nations. My issue isn't that it's inaccurate, but it's that it removes the mystery from it all. I think I know exactly why they did it like this. They knew that Aang was a popular character, so even though they made this series with casual viewers who may or may not have seen the original in mind, they still felt like showing the backstory of Aang because you like Aang, right? You recognize that thing from your childhood, right? Now, this technically isn't a problem fundamentally, that it's not as mysterious as the original series, as long as the scene is still good. The problem is that the scene isn't good. There is so much wrong here for so many reasons. The biggest sin that this backstory commits is disobeying the show don't tell rule. The scene with Gyatso, for example, is telling Aang and the audience that they're friends instead of showing it through more subtle words that express some sort of friendship with Aang, instead of just telling us.
Can't I just keep pretending I'm your friend?
You are my friend.
Even when Aang is scared, he tells us as if the audience doesn't understand what they're watching.
I don't want to leave. I don't want the responsibility. I'm scared of my power. I'm scared of being alone.
In the original, he was overhearing the monks telling Gyatso that they were preparing for battle. We don't need him to tell the audience that he's scared. We as the audience can see it on his face and movement. In the new one, he just says he's scared to be responsible and alone, and we haven't heard them talk about how much big responsibility the Avatar is already, apparently. This is bad because it's unsubtle in comparison to the show. I'm worried that a show where characters can literally be more expressive would be better at the show don't tell rule. But acting is such a powerful thing that can convey emotion like nothing else can. This scene just spells out why Aang is scared without giving the audience a chance to process it.
I need to remember who I am. But I know who I am. I like to play airball and eat banana cakes and goof off with my friends. That's who I am.
Then we have a barrage of stupid shit to get through afterwards. So after Aang says he's scared to the mentally 5-year-old audience, he rides off with Appa.
Just needs to go up where things always make more sense.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
He replicates the original scene where him and Appa ride away from the responsibilities of the Avatar. So in the original, he rides away for good. He wants to get away from the responsibility, lack of relatability to his peers, and the weight of the war with the Fire Nation. In episode 12 of Book 1, he starts having dreams about him flying away from his problems. In the cartoon, he clearly feels bad for leaving his people in the world to die by the Fire Nation. It clearly establishes the guilt he felt for running away from a situation where he was needed. In that same episode, the fisherman yells at him for abandoning their people, and Aang actually feels like he's right, and he runs away again, making the same mistake as last time in a different form. This is the point where we see part of his backstory, where it was revealed that he was made the Avatar by the monks and left the air nomads. There is so much that makes the scene in Book 1 so damn good, but the point is that Netflix completely ruined it. Instead of running away for good with no intention of going back, even if he doesn't know where he's going, he just decides to take a stroll and gets afraid when there's a storm and suggests they turn back. What's the reason this is stupid, you may be asking? The first thing is that in the original, running away for good was his choice, and to an extent, he was right that it was his fault for turning his back on the world in the cartoon when they needed him most. And here, he just sort of takes a break, and then it storms, and then he tries going back, but then it's too late. It doesn't have that feeling that anything was really his fault for doing something all that bad anymore. It's the difference between walking in a desert and going out for a 30-minute jog only to come back 10 minutes early when it starts raining. He just sort of gets sad and leaves. There's no real sense that he wanted to leave people even for just his own sake. In the original, he felt flawed, but here he just sort of takes a midnight drive and gets lost. The way they adapt him confronting his guilt later, when they go to the spirit realm and sees Gyatso in spirit, is actually kind of a sweet moment, in isolation. But it sucks because of what builds to this hollow and thin payoff. Unfortunately, it also does that tell don't show thing. It's not even worth noting how he confronts it, considering how dull it is. I just realized that all of this hinges on what happens in literally the first 30 minutes. Jesus, this is gonna take so long. So now that we've gone past the atrocious backstory scene, we're now on to the scene that was actually the first scene of the original show. This version of it kinda sucks and is completely hollow because there's no mystery. They may as well cut to them finding him, it sucks. Once again, more telling over showing, despite this being the cool, edgy version that's not your mom's avatar. We need to explain Katara not bending to the audience.
You were waterbending again, weren't you?
Don't worry. No one could see me.
We're at war.
Waterbending is what built our culture. Our way of life. Keeping it alive is our duty.
You ever realize that the Nickelodeon show for kids is more subtle? This is the mature version, by the way. Also, forgot to mention, but Aang literally flies without his staff/glider now. Why does he even need it anymore outside of it being recognizable? People can just fly in this show now, when only the Fire Lord and like Zhang could fly in the original series. Who cares? Also, Zuko is here too, I guess. I would say that the way the show handles the Fire Nation is pretty decent compared to everything else here. It's not great, but it's something, I guess. I think the Game of Thrones approach works best with the Fire Nation rather than every other character. Everyone else seems boring for some reason, even though you can tell the actors clearly love these characters. Unfortunately, their love can't save the series from being completely mediocre. The second episode of Netflix Avatar is probably the single worst one in the entire season. This is the episode that caused probably the most controversy, and for a good reason. You see, the original episode in the cartoon focused on Sokka's sexism. He basically feels that guys are better in fighting than girls, and therefore is in disbelief that he was successfully captured and beaten by a squad of female warriors.
Show yourselves, cowards! Who are you? Where are the men who ambushed us?
There were no men. We ambushed you.
He eventually forms a bond with one of the warriors, Suki, and even humble enough to let her teach him their ways and learn humility after he gets his ass beat. At the end of the original episode, he learns that she wasn't just a girl or just a warrior, but both.
I'm sorry.
For what?
I treated you like a girl when I should have treated you like a warrior.
I am a warrior. But I'm a girl, too.
I personally don't think the episode was the most amazing or compelling or whatever, but it was certainly more mature than anything the Netflix show did with it. It may not have been as groundbreaking as some lead on, but it was a fairly mature handling of the subject for children. So of course the grown up and mature Netflix show has to do away with that. The reason was because apparently women shouldn't be exposed to such hatred? I don't think I have to say how that's more sexist. Ironic that the mature version of this story isn't mature enough to tackle sexism. The new version of it is just hilariously bland, so basically the same thing happens except without Sokka shit-talking girls, but it's more generic. They don't even get captured in this one, they just sort of stumble across. So Suki instantly falls for Sokka and vice versa. Sokka thinks she's brave and hot, and Suki thinks he's brave and hot. What do they bond over, you may ask? Their leadership, I guess? They train with each other for no reason other than they're really infatuated with each other. Sokka learning to be humble? What the hell is that? The original cartoon was just too offensive to modern women to possibly be directly adapted. Let's teach women that they know nothing and need a man to expose them to the world because that's less sexist. What does Sokka even learn in this episode that's important to his development? He learns to be a better leader? You see what happens when you take out the part of his character while not replacing with anything interesting? The reason why this adaptation of Book 1's episode is so bad isn't because it's different, but because of the fact that it's not being replaced with anything interesting. It's just a generic Netflix romance now with no reason to exist. The original was more compelling because Sokka actually learned something. It's arguably pretty simplistic and rudimentary, but I'd prefer that to nothing at all. My problem isn't rooted in lack of accuracy. It's rooted in the fact that there's nothing here. If they could just replace it with something else close or more interesting than his sexism, then maybe there could be a reason to like this way more. Unfortunately, it's just boring and there's nothing interesting to latch onto. They also seem to have foregone the subplot of Aang getting over the love and adoration of the town. I won't pretend that that was the best either, but weird how that's just missing. It's just business as usual, I guess, which is better than the bland romance over there. He also turned into Kyoshi before he turns into Roku. The Kyoshi Village episode in this version is probably the worst the show gets in terms of adapting the series. The rest of the episodes are just forgettable slop, and that's what I hate most about the show. It's safe, it's rushed, and it's boring slop. From here on out, I'm not going to break down what happens in the episodes because they're so unworthy of noting now. They adapt a lot of stuff in basically the same way as the original series, but it's more bland. But they do tend to combine and rearrange plotlines. They do the whole jet things, and it's boring this time. The thing is that the episodes, in terms of adapting the show and mere quality, are simply better than the second one. Although being better than the worst way to adapt something doesn't make it good, in the same way that this show being better than the Shyamalan movie doesn't make it good. From episode 3 and onwards, the concepts are actually decent for adaptation, but extraordinarily poor in execution. From the third episode to the end of the adaptation, they seem to just combine and switch the order of plot lines from the original. Like combining the Mechanist episode with the stuff with Jet happening in Omashu, or the plot with Boomy happening after the stuff with Jet. It seems like they just mix random parts of the first season, so you can't tell them that they didn't adapt all of Book 1. I think this is the point where it stops being excruciatingly bad as an adaptation, but it's all so dull somehow. This show's tone completely contradicts what people liked about the original show. They wanted to shove in this Game of Thrones style, but forget that some of the best development from the show happened in episodes that were side stories. Call it filler all you want, but Avatar was complete because of its side stories. Many times characters would go through meaningful changes through these episodes. Later on in the show, the one-off episodes become some of the best material in the series. This show doesn't have time for all that because what's fun, am I right? This show is serious and dark, and not your dad's pussy-ass Nickelodeon kid show Avatar. This is so dark and mature. It's so mature for having nothing resembling fun that could actually expand the universe of the show. The original show's one-offs aren't anything like anime filler. It wasn't there just because there wasn't a budget that week, or a chapter to adapt, or whatever. They were important for world building. They made things that happened in later parts of the show more impactful because you knew the characters and grew to care about them. Would the arc in book 2 where Appa's loss be impactful if we didn't see the bond between him and Aang? Jesus, I wonder how they're gonna adapt that part of the story if at all. If they are, they have already failed at making me care about this version of any of these characters, so it's likely not that it'll even be that good. In fact, Appa's like not even in the show at all, and I kind of just forget he's there. He's just sort of the family car now. The characters in the series suck and don't bounce off of each other very well at all. They have absolutely nothing that evokes chemistry, nor are they good individually. For as many boilerplate friendship speeches that Aang makes in this show, I can't buy that any of these guys are friends at all. Aang's relationship with Zuko is somehow more compelling than it is with Sokka and Katara. In fact, a lot of things involving Zuko and the Fire Nation are pretty okay for the most part. They put a lot more work into fleshing out the Fire Nation and even Zhao of all characters than Aang's group. Zhao in the original was a fine starter villain for that show. He was ruthless, power-hungry, charismatic, and didn't give a damn about spirituality as long as it served his purpose. He wasn't the best antagonist, but for the villain of the first season, he was fine enough. In the Netflix one, he's still not fantastic, but I'm surprised as to how much they gave him in comparison to the original. Still not a lot, but it's good. Enough. Most of the Fire Nation stuff borders on good in this new version. They were good in the original, but they were only really well done because of how they affected the other characters, rather than who they actually were. In this one, I was far more interested in the Fire Nation than anything else. Now, there are many differences, but they're differences that make sense. Mostly. For example, you can't replicate Ozai from the original cartoon in live action. It's just impossible. Up until the start of book 3, he was a silhouetted figure. It worked for that show because it was animated. So of course the live action version they have to show his face. They can't do that silhouette shit again. The way they handled Ozai in this show, from what they've shown so far, is pretty decent. If I'm being honest, in the original Ozai wasn't exactly that compelling as a character on his own terms, and sort of lacked development, but he was good in terms of how his presence impacted other characters like Zuko or Azula. In the Netflix version, he pits Zuko and Azula against each other as siblings. The only real issue with this is that Azula feels kind of shoehorned in this part of the show. She gets so little screen time that it makes her moments of appearing within the show feel somewhat forced. It also kinda doesn't make sense that Ozai pits them against each other when Azula is the clear favorite. But I guess it would make sense to try pushing Azula harder to become a Fire Lord later when he's the Phoenix King or something in the future. The Fire Nation, Ozai, and Zuko are the only redeeming parts of this show that were adapted. One of the only things besides Azula that I didn't like was the relationship between Iroh and Zuko. There were jokes in the original cartoon, but Iroh actually gave advice more than he just gave jokes with the two. In this one, it's mostly jokes, and it makes moments of actual drama feel weightless. Of all the fun parts to keep, they decided to just use these MCU-ass quips for Iroh for some reason. I think my biggest problem is that Zuko's banishment is dealt with weirdly here. In the original and in this one, Zuko disagreed with a fire general, and his father challenged them to an Agni Kai, which is a firebending duel. The twist was that Zuko actually had to fight Ozai, and of course, Zuko never wanted to fight his dad. What makes this heart-wrenching is that we're seeing this 13-year-old kid that doesn't want to hurt his dad to the point of not wanting to do anything, while his dad basically calls him weak for it. It not only showed that Ozai was humiliated by his son not wanting to fight him, but it also gave a sense of helplessness and that Zuko truly had good in his heart, which paved the way for his redemption at the beginning of book 3. In this one, he's shocked for about 2 seconds to just fighting him. The whole point was that he wasn't willing to fight him as a 13-year-old boy that spoke his mind and learned that war wasn't a place for a child such as himself to do such. In this one, we just have a cool fight scene and all the weight is gone. If we want to talk about the worst handling of any character though, it's Katara. Listen, I'm not one of those strong women bad people, but it's a giant problem across every main character exacerbated by Netflix Katara's writing. In the cartoon, she was strong and willing to waterbend, but she was also really insecure when she saw Aang pick up on waterbending very quickly. She was also way more motherly in the original. In the first season, she's probably at her weakest in terms of writing, but that's only because it gets better, especially in book 3. In the Netflix series, she's just so weirdly idealized like every other main character. She can waterbend without even trying. She's literally given a scroll from Grand Grand, which she had to steal from pirates in the original cartoon, by the way. She basically masters waterbending in the first season, and neither she nor Aang are ever really taught waterbending at all. In fact, she literally practices once and is basically a master. What the hell? She literally says so herself.
You found a master, haven't you?
Yes. You're looking at her.
Circling back to Aang with this point, Aang never learns waterbending. I assume it's because of instead of the bending making it work the body differently for each form, it just sort of works the same way for all and is completely generalized. I know that sounds nitpicky, but if he already knows how to waterbend by season 2 of this show, when that comes out, I swear that would be stupid because he was never shown to learn waterbending once in this season. Every character being just capable without growth shines a light on the aforementioned idealization of the main characters. Sokka can't be sexist or learn humility. Aang can't actually feel guilt for running away and learning to overcome that. And Katara can't go through an arc where she actually trains. The show is so generic and ironically lacks the maturity of the TVY7 Nickelodeon cartoon for children. There is so much more I could possibly talk about, like Gran literally restating the intro bar for bar.
Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
I swear, when this scene happened, I was fucking rolling on the ground in laughter. If you're gonna pander to your audience, at least do it correctly. Imagine making a new Ninja Turtles adaptation, but then like some random old guy in the street just says, "Those really are the heroes in a half shell." But man, this adaptation is already bad enough, and doesn't really need more to talk about. Netflix Avatar is pretty much what I don't like about adaptations. It's mediocre, boring, and lacks the fun, heart, and maturity of the original cartoon. Every review I heard of the show before and after watching it, and before rewatching the original, always fell under the, well, it's better than the Shyamalan one sort of argument, which is honestly so weird to praise. Getting brain surgery with zero anesthesia is better than the Shyamalan version. That movie is literally one of the worst movies of all time. I'd certainly hope this one with more money and production value in 2024 is better than it. Yeah, they pronounced the name right, and it looks like Avatar, and it has cool bending, but it lacks what made the original show good. I wouldn't call it completely soulless, because the cast and crew clearly loved working on it, even after the original creators left. These young actors clearly love the characters that they're playing, even if their characterization kinda sucks. And I'm kind of happy that they're genuinely caring about these performances, but the show's writing and the characters are still hollow. Netflix Avatar is definitely a Netflix adaptation of Avatar, if that's one way to put it. It's bland, derivative, tries too hard to be mature while still feeling childish, and the biggest sin is just making Avatar boring. If you like the show, that's great for you. If you haven't watched or seen the original at all, please do it anyway. The original cartoon is honestly more mature, thought-provoking, and heartfelt than this one. As much as I hope that the adaptations for book 2 and 3 are better, this clearly wasn't a very good first impression. Can I talk about good remakes now?